This channel mostly covers outdoor adventure like hiking and backpacking, but today I wanted to talk about how I avoided paying rent until I was 31 years old. I feel like I haven't had a chance to explain my backstory in as much detail as I want to, and I've heard it said, especially in the thru-hiking community, that whoever was saying this thought thru-hiking was the only time they had seen people living outside of the normal day-to-day. You grow up, you get a job, you live in a house, you might have kids type life that most people fall into. But I can think of so many ways to live outside of the norm. All the ways I'm about to cover aren't right or even possible for some people, but you might be surprised there might be something you haven't thought of yet. I've been putting off recording this video because I think someone's just gonna be like, yeah, it's easy to not pay rent when your parents give you a bunch of money. And while I am very lucky, my parents have helped me out in some ways, and I'll go through that as I tell you the story I'm about to tell you, and probably growing up somewhere steady and then having a place to come back to if everything went wrong, that gave me a lot of confidence. And I am lucky in a lot of ways, but a lot of the stuff I'm about to talk about came from my own research, my own willingness to give up comfort and convenience, and my own thinking outside of the box. So let's dive right into it with part one, college. I was very blessed to be able to go to college and not have to enter the workforce right away. I lived in a dorm that my parents were able to pay for. They had saved up for me to go to college, and I also got a scholarship that covered my tuition, so they were able to use that money for my living situation. In the summertime, when the dorms weren't open, I worked at a summer camp as a camp counselor, so I got a place to stay and free food. But that being said, I was on call all the time. If a kid got homesick, I would have to wake up and help them. At meals, I was eating with kids, making sure they got enough to eat, making sure everyone was getting along. So while it was a trade-off, it was still free place to stay and free food. And I really liked that. So once I graduated college, I moved on to phase two, seasonal work. The seasonal jobs that I did were working for a YMCA that was more of a budget-friendly family resort. I worked outdoor education, which, if you don't know what that is, it's usually at a summer camp or some outdoor facility where kids come on field trips, learn about nature, do high ropes courses, that kind of thing. And then in the summer, back to camp again. The way it would work was, in the beginning, you would have a contract. You would know you would be expected to work this many months. You would get room and board. And some people had cars, some people didn't. The people that had cars were pretty good about saying, hey, I'm going to grocery store, anyone want to come? So I also didn't have a car during this phase of my life. The way I found out about these jobs was coolworks.com. Great website, found a lot of jobs from there. The pros to this kind of lifestyle was that it was a lot of people that were really similar to me. They loved the outdoors. A lot of us had just graduated college too. It was in cool places like Colorado and California, up in the mountains, and it was like college, but like with people that had more similar interests to me, and it was just magical. The cons to this lifestyle, though, was that it was a very unsustainable lifestyle. Because they're giving you room and board, they don't pay minimum wage. So you could save money if you really tried, but you weren't going to accumulate a whole lot. Also, because you worked with your friends, you spend time off probably talking about your job because that's what you had in common, and just everything revolving around work, it became your identity, and that really was not a good long-term thing. It was very easy to be burnt out the last couple months of your contract. And because of that, when I finally got to the end of my rope, I was ready to move on to phase three, international travel. First, I got a working holiday visa in Australia. If you don't know what that means, It's like you're allowed to enter the country, they know you're going to be a long-term visitor, and you're allowed to have a job. So first I was an au pair. I found that job through aupairworld.com. Kind of worked like a dating website, as weird as that sounds. You'd make a profile, families would make a profile, and people could reach out and message each other if they thought they were a good fit. I got so lucky with my host family. Not everyone has a great experience with au pairing, so be careful, but I had a great time. Oh, I guess I haven't said what an au pair is, in case anyone doesn't know. It's a fancy word for a live-in nanny, usually from another country. So I got my own room, shared a bathroom with the kids. It was awesome because you really got to see what everyday life was like in another country, not just like, this is Sydney Opera House, you know? That job lasted for 6 months, and when it was time to move on, my next job was work for accommodation doing housekeeping on a tropical island. So that was absolutely beautiful. The way my job worked was 4 hours a day. We would do housekeeping at a guest house. We would change the sheets, mop the floors, walk around and look for something to do, which was probably the most excruciating part of the job. And then we got to stay on the property in a smaller, a little bit run down house. Like, there were possums that lived in the ceiling above me, but still, I got to live on a tropical island for a little bit. That didn't last forever because having to buy groceries and not making any money, you know, our pay was being able to stay there. I had to move on eventually. In Australia, you can work on a farm, or if you're from a country like the US, there's also an option to work in hospitality. This is where me being kind of a planner type person did not come in handy, because my strategy was like emailing or calling a bunch of places. Do you need anyone trying to do a second-year visa? What I should have done was just gone to a big city and showed up in person and just been ready to accept anything. I know that now looking back, but in the moment I was like, why isn't anyone answering my emails? So could not stay a second year, but I knew I wanted to go out with a bang, and I found it. Solo travelers are very often open to meeting other solo travelers. So on Facebook, I found someone that was moving from Perth all the way to Melbourne, and he was driving his van there looking for travel mates to come along with him. I got to go on that trip, and for a month, every day was so exciting. It was 3 of us. We always were exploring new places. I always had people to be around, so that was just the best, but eventually had to return back to the old USA. Once I got back, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to settle down, so the easiest thing was going back to seasonal work, which I shouldn't have because I was really burnt out on it by that point. But it's just so easy because you know you're probably going to make friends, you have food and place to stay taken care of. So I did outdoor education again for a whole year, and in the fall I decided, okay, I'm only going to eat food from the dining hall. I'm only going to do free things on the weekend. I'm trying to save every penny I make because I wanted to do 3 months of continuous budget travel in Europe. I saved up over $10,000, and that was enough to stay in hostels or budget accommodation, take the cheapest way of travel, usually the bus. Sometimes sleeping on the bus overnight, because then you get somewhere new and you don't have to pay for somewhere to sleep, but you also get a terrible night's sleep. I would eat the local food sometimes, but also get grocery store food, so I wasn't spending a lot on eating out every single meal. And likewise, I did some paid for activities, but I also just walked around, people watched, window shopped, and just took in the novelty of being in a new place. I think a lot of times, especially us that grew up in the US, tend to think that traveling is just for rich millionaires, right? Plane tickets are hundreds of dollars. Those are expensive. But there are a lot of options like staying in hostels and ways to not vacation like a millionaire, you know? Then there was a bit of an interruption. It was 2020 when I went to Europe. So come March, I received word that travel wasn't recommended anymore. So I came back to the US. I had to cut a week off my trip, but a week out of 3 months, that's really not that bad. When I got back, I had a camp job lined up, and I thought this was going to be where I settled down for a while, but that got canceled. Summer camp could have happened because of COVID. This whole time when I was in between adventures, I was visiting my parents. They were happy to have me. I was only there for a little bit, went on my merry way. But after the camp job got canceled, there wasn't a lot of other jobs I could go get because, it was a pandemic. Every industry was refiguring out itself. So my parents were like, well, why don't you just stay here? They had already paid off their house. They didn't have a mortgage anymore. So they were like, don't worry about rent necessarily, but we're all eating the same food. So how about giving us grocery money? And I was like, sure, sounds fair. Let's do it. I was able to find work with some camps that were doing alternative programming that lasted summer to a little ways into the fall. And then I had to do something. So the GE manufacturing plant in Louisville, Kentucky hires a lot of people. I knew I could make pretty good money, so that's what I did. It was definitely different from any job I've ever done before, but on the plus side, you didn't really have to use your brain. You weren't supervising children. You weren't planning anything. It was just the same repetitive motion all day and plenty of time to daydream. And after a while of saving, I could finally head out again on phase 4, living out of a van/pack. Ever since I went on that van trip while I was living in Australia, I was like, that was so awesome. I really want to do it again. I couldn't afford a big van because it would cost more initially. The build would be more intricate. The fuel costs while you were on the road, and probably insurance too. I thought it'd be much less expensive if I got an SUV or a minivan, and a minivan slightly had some more space, so that's what I went with. For work during that time, I did DoorDash, which was convenient because I could do it whenever I wanted to. I earned a little bit of money from my YouTube channel that I started in 2020 that you're watching right now. I also had a short-term job with a company that rented out bikes to people going to Burning Man. I never went to Burning Man, but I worked with the bikes that did. Living in a van, of course, there were pros and cons. The pros was obviously exploring awesome new places every single day, being so able to move from place to place and have a place to stay. No need to figure out, oh, I'm staying at this hostel tonight. You just find a place to park. And that was a beautiful way of life. At the same time, there were inconveniences like, oh, I gotta remember to get water when I'm in town. I heard that living in a van, you meet a lot of other people that are doing the same thing. That wasn't really the case for me because I was on a mission to go to all 48 states, so I was moving kind of fast, and also because I was by myself, I wasn't about to strike up a conversation with someone. Now, at this point in my life, I had gone on 3 backpacking trips that were about 2 to 3 weeks each, and I was like, you know what? What if I try to backpack the Appalachian Trail? And I think in this video, I've used the 2 senses of the word backpacking. First, backpacking Europe. I wasn't hiking everywhere. I just had all my possessions in a backpack and I was traveling on the cheap. And the other sense is backpacking, as in you have a tent and food and stuff in your pack and you're on a trail. So just to clarify, the AT took me 6.5 months, and living out of a pack wasn't something you could do continuously. I guess you could if you really tried, but I couldn't because it was something I had to save up for, like backpacking Europe. A time when you have just accumulated a lot of money and then you get to go. But after the AT, it was the end of my rent-free life. For a good reason, though. I met my significant other on the trail, and for the first time, I had the option to split rent with someone. We live in a small town in Indiana. Our rent is $800, so $400 each, plus we pay electricity and Wi-Fi Landlord pays for water. So generally, I think that's probably one of the best deals you can get. And you all, it is so awesome. There's so many things I feel like I especially appreciate because of the way I live my life. First, I don't have to be a minimalist anymore. I can have arts and crafts supplies with me. I can have holiday decorations that are in storage most of the year. And I don't have to feel temporary wherever I am. Like, I remember being in Berlin when I was in Europe. I was at a coffee shop, people watching outside the window, and everyone had a place to be. Everyone was going somewhere. And I was like, every single person I can see right now either has a job, has a home, has a group of friends. So what I mean is, it's nice to have a place to feel like I belong. I have my own space, I can decorate, I have to clean more, but that's okay. I know I'm going to be warm in the winter and cool in the summer. I have a comfy couch to relax on. I have ice anytime I want it. Downsides to living the way I did for so long is that instead of having, this is going to make me sound uncool, but I don't have a whole lot of close friends that have been in my life for years. I do, however, have a lot of far away friends that it was fun to go visit them when I was living in a van. But because I was always going somewhere new every couple months, it was harder for deep friendships to form. And even when they did, it was like, well, we're going to move on, and it's just hard to keep a friendship going over texts and phone calls, you know? Also, sometimes I feel like I'm missing life skills, like cooking, for example. Don't get me wrong, it was awesome to have a lot of jobs where I got free food, but at the same time, I didn't never really learn how to cook very well. And I also wonder, the places I worked were on a budget. It wasn't the nicest food cooked by a private chef. It was from a Cisco truck. And sometimes I wonder, I hope there's no health impacts of that, but hopefully not. And again, I am so fortunate to have been able to do this. I think if I had any kind of medical needs, a lot of this would be very much harder. Although there are people out there making it work, it would have still been a lot of extra planning, a lot of obstacles. Another reason I was able to do this is because I don't have anyone that depends on me. I don't have a sick or elderly family member I have to stay home and take care of. I just had to worry about myself. And I'm very fortunate to have been able to meet the people I did, come across the websites I did that gave me the information and the ideas to be able to do this. Just finding it, that was really lucky in the first place. And if you're in those shoes now looking for ideas, I'll put a list on your screen of everything I've done in case you can't remember all that. And also some other ideas I have that I haven't personally done, but they're in the same vein. Maybe they'll work for you. And traditional life isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? It just wasn't my cup of tea. And I think it's important that everyone considers all your options in life, because if you don't have the idea to try something, then you might be missing out. And hey, life is short. Have a good one.